The energy remains high as we welcome you to hour number 3, our third and final on this second Saturday in November. It is College Football Today on SportsGrid. He is the mastermind of the college football pigskin. That is Joe Lisi. He is old K-Dubs. That is Kevin Walsh. And I am Ben Stevens. Now we talked about some top 10 ranked teams around the country and what their Week 11 Saturday looks like. Texas, off week last week after the narrow win in Nashville against Vanderbilt. They're back at home in Austin, hosting a Florida team that has been good covering numbers as of late. 4 consecutive covers for the Gators, all as an underdog. And last week, Joe, in the cocktail party in Jacksonville against Georgia, had DJ Lagway remained healthy the entirety of the game, it might not have just been a cover, but potentially an outright upset of UGA. We'll never know. Late in the opening half, Lagway carted off with what looked to be a severe hamstring injury. They are listing him as a true game-time decision. Again, a great program. The number 3 touchdowns in favor of Texas. Joe, anytime you're carted off the field with a hamstring injury, you have to worry, even if you do play, about your mobility, certainly for the true freshman quarterback in Lagway. How competitive is the game between Florida and Texas in Austin today?
Well, even if Lagway plays, I'm still concerned that Florida might be a worn-down football team. They've played well against some of the better teams in the SEC. That was a rivalry game from a defensive perspective. They shut down Carson Beck for much of the game, 3 interceptions, played very well and lost in overtime against Tennessee. I think this is a different animal, especially with a well-rested Texas group. Again, I don't expect Lagway to play. It'll be Warner, the backup redshirt freshman that came on, played well, 96 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. If it's his first start, This is a dominant performance by Texas. You know why? Because it has to be. They played down, I believe, to the level of competition on the road a few weeks ago in Vandy. They almost lost that game. You have to step on the pedal now and prove that you're deserving of a top 10 battle. I just think from the schedule, it might have caught up to Florida. I think Texas has the speed advantage. They should roll in this matchup and cover.
So this is an interesting spot for me where I saw this number and then was like, hold on a minute. Is the cocktail party like pure home field advantage for Florida? I don't think it is. I don't know. Maybe I'm still the outsider in the college football world to this group because that number was 14.5. So we tacked on 8 in a game the Gators hung the whole way. And you might tell me, well, that's the gap from Lagway to the buddy who's going to check in today. But here's the thing about Buddy. He's got a whole other week of preparation. Okay, that's one.
Yeah.
2, the selling point on Florida this year's kind of been the defense.
Yeah.
And Texas is only covering SEC plays against Oklahoma. I'm sorry, that just does not count. It doesn't. 22 for the no way. Listen. If this is a trap, then I'm already at the bottom of the pit asking for somebody to come pick me up. I'm all over Florida here.
Buddy Aiden Warner, the Yale transfer, if it is not DJ Lagway, will get the start. Last week, 7 of 22, 66 yards and INT. Did lead 2 scoring possessions. One, a late opening half field goal. The other, a touchdown drive to tie the game against Georgia in the fourth quarter. I was on the under of that game. Felt great early on. Georgia scored 2 late touchdowns to win by 14. But, Kev, to your point, that's the only over that Florida has played in its covers outside of the Kentucky game in its last 4 as an underdog. Also, just outside of that, we did get some word this week out of the Gators. Billy Napier on a very warm seat all year long in Gainesville, expected to return for 2025. And, Joe, to your point about Texas, second best scoring defense in the country. Best total defense in the country. They only allowed 38 total points in their first 6 games of the year, but 24 or more in their last 2. The loss to Georgia and a close non-cover against Vandy. And, Kev, to your point, against first-time SEC foes, so not Oklahoma in the Red River rivalry, Texas just 0-3 against the number. Now, as we say every week with Florida State, a game we all circled entering the year that is not quite living up to that billing. Under the watchful eye of Touchdown Jesus in South Bend, it is top 10 Notre Dame hosting Florida State. 24.5 is the spread. Joe, at 25 and a hook yesterday, it was the 3rd largest number Florida State has ever been booked as an underdog since 1975. Is there anything that FSU has left in the tank to try to keep this game even to within 3 touchdowns?
I mean, if you force me to bet the game, I would take the points with Florida State. And I only say that because look at the total. Look at where the spread is. I think they have to run the football. That's going to be a very difficult task. They're averaging 72 yards per game, 2.7 yards per carry, and that goes right into the front seven of Notre Dame. And the strength of Notre Dame isn't even the front seven. It's the secondary, holding opposing offenses to 48% completion percentage, less than 10 touchdowns allowed. I think you've given out 6 or 7, multiple interceptions. They're a turnover machine. I don't see how they can win this game. How motivated is Florida State? You're 1-8. When are you going to show up to at least make it a 4-quarter game? It's one thing against Duke. You have a rivalry game. Okay, you put up some points, but you still lose and get blown out in the 4th quarter. Guys aren't tackling. Offense, nobody's, making plays. The penalties. At some point, it has to stop. It might stop on week 16, 17 after they're in, South Beach, partying when the season's over. But I would take the points.
What did you have the closing number at when FSU played Miami?
22, I think, is what it closed. Consensus around the market. So technically a push because Miami won by 22.
Here's why. The way these games keep trending is wait until the very second before kickoff, and this number will close 25.5, and then Florida State will lose by 25 because that's what happened against Clemson and that's what happened against Miami. Because this is – again, I've talked about this a few times, but when their season was clearly done, which was 2 weeks into the season, all right, let's just see if they can win one of the 3 big games, which was the matchups with Clemson, Miami, and Notre Dame. And then the tone of those games all shifted by the time we got there. And the whole idea of, FSU has to play like it matters. They just lost to North Carolina by 24 in their own building.
A UNC team, by the way, that was riding a 4-game losing skid earlier this year.
I don't actually know, and it's because we have so much to do.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've talked enough about that Florida State is.
Sure.
Terrible. Florida State is not, man, we didn't think they'd be this bad. Florida State is one of the worst teams at the power level. One of the absolute worst teams in all of college football. Like, we were thinking when this team was like 1-4, I don't know if you can get rid of Norvell. Is there any world this guy keeps his job? You made me play a game. I take a Jeremy Love prop. I don't love it. It's a split backfield. It's a little weird. But, every time Florida State checks up, I'm like, can we just take 3 hours to figure out what in the world happened here?
And we'll have the time to do that. And, Kev, you are right. Mike Norvell now might be the coach in the Sunshine State on the hottest seat.
Incredible.
That was once Billy Napier's. Florida State, in the 8 games played domestically, a.k.a. not in Dublin, they have scored 16 points or less. They are the worst Power 4 scoring offense in the country, averaging 14.4 points per game. And what they don't do well defensively is shut down the run. 191 yards per game this year. I think Notre Dame names its number. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. Another 24.5-point spread in a matchup in the SEC. Tennessee back on Rocky Top with a huge game next week against Georgia, laying 24.5 against a Mississippi State team that has been booked as a double-digit dog 3 times in SEC play. They're a perfect 3-0 against the spread. Meanwhile, the Vols, a double-digit dog 3 times in SEC play. They're 0-3 against the number. How do you see this large spread today in Knoxville?
This game, to me, is all about one thing, and it's whether Nicky Treats, I was going to try it, I'm not going to. It's whether he's back or not. Last week, they went out. He threw 38 times, 9 more than his next closest pass attempts, tossed 292 against Kentucky, completed 74% of his passes. I know they didn't come close to covering in that game. It was one of his better games. Mississippi State secondary, last 5 SEC quarterbacks, 317.4 yards per game, 9.3 yards per attempt, 14 touchdowns, 5 picks. Nico should abuse a 230.5 passing prop in this game.
I like Tennessee to smash them. 211 on the ground, Miss State giving up, and the over.
477 total yards for Tennessee last week. A bunch of missed field goals. More on CFT next.
Together, both Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson had huge nights. Aaron Rodgers loves the two big targets, and he says if this is going to happen, going to be very tough on the defense to decide who they want to go after.
Adams and this kid, Wilson, I won't deny what they can do, but nobody else does jack.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Right here with you on Pro Football Today on SportsGrid. Odds in motion, trying to see what lines have moved throughout the week.
Never felt more comfortable in this set than I do for this year. I am ready. I'm just getting angry. The hot takes are going to be here all long, people. What in the world is going on in Miami, Dom?
It's not particularly anything to shy away from just because many people are on top of it.
Hot take, hot take.
I think this line is asking you once again to take New Orleans.
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
A lot of concern, I would say, for Georgia in Carson Beck. 3 interceptions once again. His third 3-interception game in the last 5 for UGA.
You can argue if they had Alex Orji as their starting quarterback for Georgia, they would be perfect and unbeaten right now just by not turning the football over and running it with your talented backfield.
The early line, only on SportsGrid.
Live right here on College Football Today on this second Saturday in November on SportsGrid. It is time for the quarterback comparison for some of the biggest games of this Week 11 Saturday slate. And perhaps none bigger than tonight inside Tiger Stadium. A night game in Death Valley, perhaps the best atmosphere in all of college football. It's Jalen Milroe on one side for 11th-ranked Alabama. On the other, for 15th-ranked LSU, it is Garrett Nussmeier. A difference, Kev, in the numbers that you will see here for the passing yards props. 232.5 for Milroe, nearly 300 for Nussmeier. But, of course, Milroe's arm is not all that he presents. And for a Bayou Bengals defense that greatly struggled in the second half against Texas A&M with the athletic Marcel Reed, Jalen Milroe's legs could be a grave concern for LSU tonight.
And I think the question is, how much of that was LSU's defense not being able to contain an explosive quarterback? How much was them not game planning to have to contain an explosive quarterback? The LSU defense has been pretty good this year. I think if you look at the LSU defense and then say, hey, where do you think they'd sit this season, you'd actually project a little better. Sure. Though incredibly, they were a second half away from being top 8 and 10, top 8 in the CFP rankings. I mean, it was all right there for them, and they absolutely collapsed. It is hard for me, Joe, then to get the full scope on this LSU defense. I do think there's a temptation for me on betting Milroe, the little toss and tuck special, throw one, run one, because that kind of was the MO every single game to open this year, and we know he steps up in these big games.
Well, think about, you brought up last year. What did he rush for, 125, 150 in the game? So it's not just, you could make the argument last year they were terrible.
Yeah.
But Milroe has given them problems on the ground. So if we're looking quarterback-wise, it has to be Nussmeier from the passing perspective, because then that's their MO. They want to push tempo. They want to jump up early, and they want, first team to 40 or 50, game on. And even though Milroe could play that way, they're still averaging 254 through the air, Alabama rushing for 177 on the ground.
Yeah.
This game trends under the 58.5. Most likely it'll favor Alabama in this matchup because of the rushing attack and the athleticism of Jalen Milroe. So I would bet Nussmeier through the 292.5. I would look for a number updated on Jalen Milroe because you have to believe they utilized that with Georgia, right? His athleticism to build that lead, Georgia made adjustments, but they threw wrinkles that Georgia's defense did not see.
Last year for Jalen Milroe against LSU, albeit in Tuscaloosa, 155 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns. But for Milroe, turnovers have been a concern in 5 SEC games, 5 TDs to 6 INTs. One of the reasons that I laid off making Jalen Milroe's rushing yards prop my best bet, because I do think he will have success tonight against LSU, is the fact that Alabama has allowed 11 sacks in the last 4 games, and the fact that, Joe, as you well know, LSU gets after the quarterback, 28 sacks this year for the Bayou Bengals, and a ton of tackles for loss. They are very, very athletic and energetic up front on that defensive line. Garrett Nussmeier, 3 INTs against A&M, all in the second half, leading to that Aggies comeback and directly resulting in 17 points. Our next quarterback matchup is the next biggest game of the weekend and this Saturday in the SEC. It is number 3 Georgia and a top 20 Ole Miss team in the Grove. Carson Beckheff has struggled as of late. 11 interceptions, only 10 touchdowns in the 6 SEC games that Georgia has played. Meanwhile, Jackson Dart leads the country in passing yards. And last week against Arkansas, 515 yards and 6 touchdowns. Is there a gap in your mind between these two quarterbacks, or is the distinction closer as the odds might present?
I think there's a gap in what we've seen up until this point in the season, though I think if you were to preseason X the question, many people would expect Beck to be the better quarterback. I don't know how much of this – I mean, listen, Beck has to play well to give Ole Miss a chance, but if Beck plays well, I don't know if it'll even matter. And that was one of the things to me. You look back at last season, and you can make a very convincing argument that the best game that Beck has ever played at the college level came against Ole Miss. 18 of 25, 306 yards, 2 touchdowns, a 193 passer rating, and 96.9 QBR at the college level because he had 30 yards on the ground. And mind you, a lot of that just first half statistics, because that game was a dominant role from Georgia. It felt like, I think Dart got injured in that football game as well. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Beck steps up against what should kind of be a welcome sight in this defense.
I had to do a double check on the stats from last year because this game was dominated in the trenches, right? Carson Beck did throw for 306, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. I think he completed something like 17 of 25 in that matchup. They rushed for 300 yards on Ole Miss last year. 300. Why? And I keep saying, Georgia doesn't have a game this year where they rush for over 200. So are we confident in that rushing attack going up against that front seven? That, to me, is the matchup. And again, when I look at Dart, he's got to get through his total today. Sure. He has to get through his total. They have to push tempo. I did take a shot. I told you, I'm not betting the game right now. I do lean to Georgia just because Georgia's been there and done that. But Jackson Dart, 350 at plus 470. Took a look, guys.
That is a big shot. Around this passing yards prop for Dart is a key number. 285 or less in the 2 SEC losses. Sacked 10 times. 285 or more in the 3 SEC wins. Sacked just 3 times. Again, Carson Beck in the 3 games that Georgia has played with a 2-touchdown spread or less against conference foes. 3 INTs in all 3. Cannot do that today. Quickly, Lisi guy, let's go out to Lubbock. Baron Morton on one side, and what should be a prolific night for Shedeur Sanders against the second worst passing defense in college football. That's Texas Tech, allowing more than 307 yards per game. Lisi guy, it's why Shedeur has a number at 324.5. But you want to focus on the Red Raiders pulling off the upset. What do they need out of Baron Morton?
I think, just get in the area of 225. Don't turn the football over. He's been turnover prone. He's like Brett Favre. Take the good, the bad, and the ugly. But for Shedeur, 324, you got to get there.
Let's see if Shedeur Sanders can get through these numbers, but it bears mentioning. I am not sure there's a world he throws for 325 plus without Travis having 100 yards. It just feels like the Hunter bet is the bet to make in that instance.
I think you are paying the premium for Shedeur Sanders. I would also look at his receivers, at least 290 yards in 4 or 5 Big 12 games for the Buffs. The rest of the ring next.
together, both Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson had huge nights. Aaron Rodgers loves the two big targets, and he says if this is going to happen, going to be very tough on the defense to decide who they want to go after.
Adams and this kid, Wilson, I won't deny what they can do, but nobody else does jack.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Right here with you on Pro Football Today on SportsGrid. Odds in motion, trying to see what lines have moved throughout the week.
Never felt more comfortable in this set than I do for this year. I'm ready. I'm just getting angry. The hot takes are going to be here all long, people. What in the world is going on in Miami, Dom?
It's not particularly anything to shy away from just because many people are on top of it.
Hot take.
I think this line is asking you once again to take New Orleans.
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
A lot of concern, I would say, for Georgia in Carson Beck. 3 interceptions once again. His third 3-interception game in the last 5 for UGA.
You can argue if they had Alex Orji as their starting quarterback for Georgia, they would be perfect and unbeaten right now just by not turning the football over and running it with your talented backfield.
The early line, only on SportsGrid.
Welcome back to College Football Today, live right here on SportsGrid. The rest of the ranked in the show and some bounce-back spots for 3 teams that suffered a loss last week, looking to get back on track. To Kansas City we go, inside Arrowhead Stadium, where a 2-win Kansas team hosts Iowa State, who suffered its first loss of the year last week at home against Texas Tech. And Lisi guy, a compelling number that makes this game look like it will be another difficult test for the Cyclones. Just 2.5 points in favor of Iowa State on the road slightly, but because KU is playing some of its home games to finish out the year at Arrowhead. How do you break down this matchup? It is under a field goal. Who comes out with a win?
Yeah, I think the better quarterback is Rocco Beck, and I still believe in the defense of Iowa State giving up 15 points per game. We've seen Kansas in terms of the back end give up 220+. Beck could have a big day. They have everything in front of them. Just can't buy Lance Leipold in Kansas in this spot.
It's one of these interesting situations where we've watched Kansas all season long know that they deserve more. They've lost these games so close and so constantly that I think today there's a lot of people who say, okay, this is my shot, bet Kansas. But I think my issue is, and maybe some of the early week players are holding better numbers, Ben, you are now betting this team to win this game.
Yes.
And that's what they've not been able to do this year.
Mm-hmm.
You were catching 7, right? Sharp play, right? But that's not what you're getting. I think the books are aware that Kansas is better than the 2-6 number looks on the number, and I think that is why it is so difficult to get to the window in this game. But we talked about it within Ben's top 10. Iowa State, you could make an argument. Is this the best Big 12 team they've played? Record would obviously say no, but that's how weird their Big 12 strength of schedule has been. It's a really difficult one.
The Jayhawks have been the most compelling team to me in this conference, just 2-6, and their first cover in any of their 6 L's now 2 weeks ago in the rivalry game, the Sunflower Showdown against Kansas State, where, again, the Wildcats triumphant at home on a last-second field goal. Kansas is the best red zone offense in the country, 26 attempts, 26 scores, 21 touchdowns. They're converting more than 51.5% of their third down attempts. That's 4th best in the country. They should be better. They are just not. Iowa State covered in its first 5 FBS games, now 2 non-covers in a row as 2 touchdown favorites. Clemson was riding a 6-game win streak, entering last week at home against Louisville as near a double-digit favorite. They lost that game outright. How does Clemson respond against a Virginia Tech team that was not healthy last week against my Syracuse Orange and lost the game outright in overtime? Kev, you poked some holes in that 6-game win streak for the Tigers, and it turned out it was the correct resume to make fun of. How do you think Clemson performs today in Lane Stadium as a 5.5-point road favorite?
It's pretty fun because it's so hard to tell what is Virginia Tech, right? And I think the answer will be in the result. There'll be some confirmation bias, right? You know, you think back, we've talked about Vanderbilt a little bit on the show today. Virginia Tech was the first one to drop that game to Vanderbilt. Like, oh my gosh, remember we thought they would be something. Again, it turns out Vanderbilt is something.
Yeah.
Va-Tech's had some tough, close losses, by 3 to Rutgers, by 4 to Miami, and then last week in overtime to Syracuse. Again, Va-Tech, not all too dissimilar to what we just discussed when breaking down Kansas, is probably a bit better than the record. The thing for me, last 3 years, Dabo, 5-1 against the number off of a loss. I wonder if Cade Klubnik steps right back into rhythm here today. Maybe the safer bet would be a Clemson team total because I lean towards the Tigers.
I really like Clemson here, laying the 5.5. I was on Louisville with Kev last week. I just thought it was a bad spot in Louisville's offense. They've won 6 straight in the series. Not sold on Colin Schley. Should he get the start over Drones today? Tootin might be back. It doesn't matter. I think they got a wake-up call. They came out flat. We talked about the bye week. I think it's a different animal today. Something tells me you're on Va-Tech.
I see it differently because Kyron Drones is back at practice. So is Bayshul Tootin. And this Clemson defense, not the elite defense we are accustomed to. Pitt, its first loss of the season in a big way last week in Dallas against SMU. 48-25, SMU winning big. Now, Pitt, after its first loss, more than a touchdown favorite against Virginia. You both like the dog. Lisi, start us off.
I just think Virginia, from a perspective, fighting for bowl eligibility. They've been spunky on the road, covered a 17.5-point number, 20.5-point number against Clemson.
Yeah.
And I just think that Pitt might be shell-shocked after getting blown out by SMU last week. I think they step up.
You know, I told you I don't give you, like, the go-for-loots that you want.
Yeah.
This would be it.
This is it?
This would be if I still gave the money line dogs like I was supposed to. I saw this number and wanted to bet Virginia. Like, how do I justify it? Tony Elliott, money off the buy at UVA. Absolute money.
UVA started 4-1, has lost 3 straight, but covered in both of those losses as an underdog. Our picks for the weekend next.
Together, both Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson had huge nights. Aaron Rodgers loves the 2 big targets, and he says if this is going to happen, going to be very tough on the defense to decide who they want to go after.
Adams and this kid, Wilson, I won't deny what they can do, but nobody else does jack.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Right here with you on Pro Football Today on SportsGrid. Odds in motion, trying to see what lines have moved throughout the week.
Never felt more comfortable in this set than I do for this year. I'm just getting angry. The hot takes are going to be here all long, people. What in the world is going on in Miami, guys?
It's not particularly anything to shy away from just because many people are on top of it.
Hot take. I think this line is asking you once again to take New Orleans.
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
A lot of concern, I would say, for Georgia in Carson Beck. 3 interceptions once again. His third 3-interception game in the last 5 for UGA.
You can argue if they had Alex Orji as their starting Georgia, they would be perfect and unbeaten right now just by not turning the football over and running it with your talented backfield.
The early line, only on SportsGrid.
It is week 11 of the 2024 college football season. Our big game best bets, the best on this second Saturday in November, later on in this third and final hour. Before we get to kick, just about half an hour away here on this week 11 Saturday. Our other picks around the rest of the docket for this Saturday, right here, right now. Lisi guy, you've got 8, so fire away with your first.
I really like the card today. Either I'm going to have a great day or I'm going to get smashed. One or the other, it doesn't matter. We'll still have fun. Let me jump right into it. This is, I bring up the Armed Forces play of the day, right? We have Army, we have Navy playing. I'm not sold on Navy. They lost to Notre Dame a couple weeks ago. They dropped another game last week to Rice, completely taken out of their game plan. It's a physical South Florida team. They are 4-4 overall, fighting for bowl contention. They can run it, averaging 170 yards on the ground. They played toe-to-toe, I believe, with some of the better teams on their schedule, most notably Alabama, and they went toe-to-toe for a half with Miami. I think they certainly could knock off Navy today. Did take the 3.5. Do have them on the money line at plus 126, so I like the Bulls at home. The weather could be a factor as well. The humidity in Tampa maybe gets the Navy to some capacity. We brought up the speed of Texas against Florida. Don't like the fact that Florida, just from a schedule perspective, could be a little beaten up coming off a rivalry game. Not sure about the health of Lagway. Texas needs to show out. They're extra rested, playing at home. This is an opportunity to put pedal to the metal. I'm laying the 21.5 with the Longhorns. We just talked about Clemson. Again, no margin of error for the Tigers, right? A team that you've dominated in not recent years. Last time they played was back in 2020, but they, from the series, won 6 straight. They got a wake-up call last week. No margin of error, less than a touchdown. I'm laying it with the Tigers against Vodtech. Not sold on the consistency of Vodtech from a defensive perspective. And it just comes down to South Carolina, Vandy. I know Vandy, as a dog, is undefeated, 5-0 ATS. Yep. But, again, another physical team. I did take Rocket Sanders over 90+, but I would lay it minus the 6.5, guys.
So where we see it differently, Joe Lisi, is the Clemson and Vodtech game. I would not bet Virginia Tech if there were not promising practice reports out of Blacksburg. That's the return of Kyron Drones, the athletic and mobile quarterback, alongside his best running back in Bashal Tootin. And here's the issue with Clemson. Not the offense in games where they have lost their 2 losses this year, averaging just 12 points per game. It's the defense that even in the last 3 years in Death Valley have not been all that great. The defense has remained elite. Best total defense in the ACC each of the last 3 seasons. Not this year. They're giving up more than 350 yards per game and allowing a $140 on the ground. The last time a Clemson Tigers defense allowed more than 115 yards per game on the ground defensively back in 2016, and it still wasn't this bad at 135 yards. I think the matchup favors Vodtech. The game is at home in Lane Stadium, and with a healthy Kyron Drones, give me Virginia Tech at plus 5.5. By the way, all 4 losses for the Hokies this year by a single score. Average margin of defeat, 5.3 points per game, keeping us within that number. Maryland, over in 7 of 8 games this year, over in all 5 Big Ten games, allowing at least 37 points in its last 3 Big Ten losses. Why do I reference all that? Because Oregon's a 23.5-point favorite at home today. I think the Ducks name their number. I think Maryland might score enough to keep pace, over 57.5 out in Autzen. Speaking of naming your number, I think Notre Dame, offensively today, hammers Florida State. Number now 33.5. I like it a little bit better to get 34, but even 34.5 is fine by me. Notre Dame against non-MAC opponents this year, 5-0-1 against the spread. Again, I stress that because they go over in 4 of those 6 games as well. And they are one of 13 teams averaging more than 215 yards per game on the ground. Florida State is atrocious offensively. We know that. But FSU, who struggled last year defending the run, still really bad at doing so this year, allowing more than $190 per game. Riley Leonard, Jadarian Price, Jeremiah Love. They'll run all over this Florida State team and score at least 34 points over that team total for the Fighting Irish. Team total under for Florida. Bet it early this week at 13.5. Now it's 12 and a hook. They're calling DJ Lagway a game-time decision. Again, a great program. I'm not so sure he plays in this game. If it's Aiden Warner, only helps the team total. If Lagway is out there, one of the things that has brought him along in his true freshman season, his ability to be mobile. He had to be carted off last week with a hamstring injury. something so severe, and to come back the next week against the Texas defense with a week off to regroup after allowing at least 24 points per game in its last two, 30 to Georgia, 24 to Vanderbilt. They gave up 38 total points in the first 6 games of the year. Longhorns still the second best scoring and best total defense in the country. Longhorns keep the Florida Gators under 13.5 points. We'll get to you in just a moment, but you still got to finish off your 8. Fire through.
Yeah, so in the second half of the slate, I like Tennessee tonight, 24.5. Again, 211 on the ground. That's what Miss State's defense is giving up on top of 34 points per game. This is Nico. This is Dylan Sampson, and the rushing attack takes over. They had a close game against Kentucky last week. I think they blow out Miss State in terms of this matchup. I understand it's a whiteout at Penn State. I understand that Penn State most likely will make it to the college football playoff. But there is pressure on Drew Allen. I can't buy into that. Very inconsistent, especially in big spots. Washington playing with house money. I don't love Will Rogers, but in terms of 12.5, maybe this game is a field goal, 7 points. Give me the Huskies coming off the emotional win at home, 26-21 over USC. I think they could be live. I really like Virginia. Again, a gutty team. They could put up some points. They run it. Quarterback Calandria is pretty good. He throws, very consistent, above 60% completion percentage. I'm not sure what you're going to get out of Pitt. I think Virginia is live in this matchup. And then I took a total early kick in Hawaii, 9 o'clock. UNLV can run it. Hawaii can throw it. But guess what? 50.5. Typically, Hawaii very under in terms of their games. Yeah. This is a fishy total for me. Give me over. I think we can get it into the 60s today.
Oh, a little big-time step-up spot on a total. Do not mind that. 4 picks for me here outside of then when we get to our big game bets. We are on both Virginia at the 7.5 together. I mentioned Elliott off of a bye, if I may. Last season, 0-5 against Power Comp. Then they came off the bye and won outright at UNC, catching 23.5. They had a bye week going into the BC game. This season, laying 1.5, they win by 10. His first season, they played Georgia Tech off of a bye and won outright 3.5. Pitt is on upset alert in that game. They got beat around last week by SMU, and sometimes it's hard to get up off of the mat. Give me Nico over the 230.5 passing yards against Miss State. That team has allowed over 300 passing yards per game against the last 5 SEC teams that they faced. Nico last week had his most volume of the season. I think Josh Heupel rightfully is trying to get his star quarterback right as they get closer and closer to the college football playoff. Give me Florida catching 21.5. I understand the concerns around Lagway. This team, though, has played well defensively, and Texas's only SEC cover came against Oklahoma. That doesn't count. Florida last week was catching 14.5 from Georgia. I think we've moved far too much here. You're telling me Lagway, who's barely played any college football in his career, is already moving 7-8 points a number? No, I think that's ridiculous. I'm still buying in on the Gators, and I'm buying in on Nick Singleton low. 60-plus rushing yards at even money. It is a joint backfield of him and Katron Allen. So often on this show, it feels like this duo has been there for like 6-7 years somehow. Either Ben or I are telling you to bet the low man. Well, really, we're usually telling you to bet Katron Allen because he's almost always the low man. Now it is Singleton's turn against one of the worst rush defenses in the Big Ten, allowing over 180 yards per game on the ground in their last 5 games. Nick Singleton breaks out for 60-plus at least.
In their 3 road games for Washington as well in Big Ten play, the leading rusher has had at least 123 yards. So either Nick Singleton or Katron Allen might both get close to that number today because last week, 18 carries combined between the two backs for only 42 yards. Tyler Warren, the tight end, was the leading rusher for Penn State against the Buckeyes, which was not a great recipe, of course, offensively. Now to the big games of the weekend. Our big game best bets come your way up next, live right here on College Football Today.
Together, both Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson had huge nights. Aaron Rodgers loves the 2 big targets, and he says if this is going to happen, it's going to be very tough on the defense to decide who they want to go after.
Adams and and this kid, Wilson, I won't deny what they can do, but nobody else does jack.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Right here with you on Pro Football Today on SportsGrid. Odds in motion, trying to see what lines have moved throughout the week.
Never felt more comfortable in this set than I do for this year. I am ready. I'm just getting angry. The hot takes are going to be here all long, people. What in the world is going on in Miami, Dom?
It's not particularly anything to shy away from just because many people are on top of it.
Hot take, hot take.
I think this line is asking you once again to take New Orleans.
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
A lot of concern, I would say, for Georgia in Carson Beck. 3 interceptions once again. His third 3-interception game in the last 5 for UGA.
You can argue if they had Alex Orji as their starting quarterback for Georgia, they would be perfect and unbeaten right now just by not turning the football over and running it with your talented backfield.
The early line, only on SportsGrid.
It is the second Saturday in November. It is week number 11 of the 2024 college football season. Listen, it's the final month of this college football regular season. So every game we break down, all 5 in the next 15 minutes to set the stage for your week 11 Saturday, an added bit of significance because where we are on the calendar, and that, of course, includes Indiana. 9-win Indiana has often been a dream in Bloomington. Not anymore. 10-win Indiana? It has never happened in the history of the Hoosiers football program. They welcome in the reigning national champs in Michigan. Today in Bloomington inside Memorial Stadium, it is a 14.5-point spread in favor of the Hoosiers. This is the first time since 1968 that IU has been favored in a football game against Michigan. And Joe, against the reigning national champs, the Wolverines, Indiana's laying more than 2 touchdowns. How do you break it down?
Well, this gravy train where you just bet Indiana and they smash and you win ends today because Michigan has won 27 of the last 28 meetings. I think they can run the football, shorten the game, and at least cover the number. That's where I'm looking. Indiana might move to 10-0, and Cignetti has done a fantastic job. Love the press conferences, love everything. But this is an opportunity for Michigan to step up. Cover the number, baby. That gravy train ends Michigan today.
It's all about Michigan. I think I look at this wager for me, Davis Warren over the 160.5 passing yards. Now, I can't say it's a win-win because you only win if he throws for 161. If he doesn't, does that mean he got benched in the danger man checked into the game? Because that is a win-win. Warren, though, this is the thing. And, again, you can tell I respect Indiana. He has played 2 better defenses this season in Texas and Oregon and went through this number. IU has allowed a good amount of passing yards this year. Yes, that's because everyone's trailing against them. It's a 14.5-point number. Davis Warren projects to be throwing. I also think there's a little bit of something to the idea that Sharon Moore kind of got a lot very cute down the red zone. They didn't give Davis Warren the ball in that area, and he might feel the desire to put it more on Davis Warren because he clearly, for whatever reason this season, Sharon Moore wants to throw the football. Didn't really have interest in doing it with an NFL-level quarterback in J.J. McCarthy. This season, though, he's desperate to do it. Davis Warren gets through a light number at 160 and a hook.
So when you look at Michigan, this will be the 5th game this year for the Maize and Blue as an underdog. In their previous 4, just 1-3 both straight up and against the number. But in all 4 games as a dog so far, they've allowed at least 24 points. In fact, in 7 games against power conference competition, the Wolverines over in 6 of 7. Last year's best scoring defense in the country, now the 5th worst in the Big Ten, allowing more than 22 points per game. Welcome the wagon that is Indiana's offense. In 5 games that Curtis Work has started, hasn't even completed all the 5. Indiana has scored at least 42 points. In the 4 he is fully completed, he is thrown for 3 touchdowns. Michigan's passing defense, once elite, no longer. Will Johnson still not back for the Maize and Blue. My favorite bet, over 49.5. Don't even care if it's a little bit down to 48 and a hook. And a sprinkle on Curtis Rourke at plus 220. You talk like these logos mean something in 2024. The better football team is that logo. 27-28 does not factor in. Next up, we go to Lubbock. It's Colorado and Texas Tech. 4.5-point spread in favor of CU on the road. You know what? Get rid of this. Get rid of LaJohntay Wester. Alt line, minus 13.5 Colorado. All you're smirking and nodding over there for the fraudulent program in Texas Tech. But LaJohntay Wester has a big day, over 69.5 receiving yards, because this Texas Tech defense against the pass, second worst in the country, allowing 307. Go ahead, Mr. Not-a-Law.
Well, they stepped up against Rocco Beck in Ames last week with a dominant effort and held and contained Rocco Beck for much of that matchup, and they can run the football with Taj Brooks. We still don't know if Colorado could stop the run. They're better than they were last year, giving up $155 on the ground. They did give up 171 to Cincinnati. They're going to be rocking gray, charcoal uniforms, a la Pat Mahomes. Pat Mahomes with the overtime win against the Tampa Bay Bucks on Monday night. Outright. Forget the 4.5. Outright Tech. Bang, bang, bang. Joey McLaughlin.
Hit the retweet on that, Joey.
To Tampa Bay. That's a bad move. That's a bad move. You just lost a lot of mojo. I'll tell you right now. Listen, there's a lot going on in this slate, including a Kentucky Bucknell game, so I'm trying to get in and get out with the CU first quarter money line under Dion, perfect against the number, out of a bye in the opening quarter. I think it's important to play the money line because if this Texas Tech offense comes out hot, a 7-7 game, we're going to get our coin back, but I think that we can get it here. Tech this season 3-3 against the number in conference in this opening quarter. I think Colorado will be starting hot, fresh out of that bye week.
A lot of people have looked at this total, correctly so. Both teams could expose where the other defense is not great. But CU under in 2 straight Big 12 games, and Texas Tech perfect 3-0 against the spread as an underdog this year, actually under in 2 of those 3, including last week in the outright upset against Iowa State. Got to be lonely on that island over there, Joseph Lisi. Next up, we get to the 102nd playing of the Holy War. It's Utah and BYU tonight in Rice-Eccles. BYU is one of the 5 remaining undefeated teams in the country, checking in at number 9 in the CFP rankings. And Kev, 3.5-point road favorite in Salt Lake, a place they have not won in nearly 2 decades. How do you see the matchup in the Holy War tonight?
I think it's going to surprise people with way more scoring than anticipated here. Utah coming out of the bye can get their offense a little bit better. We have now seen the totals plummet because the books are saying, okay, they cannot score. Playing BYU and Houston could not be more different. The offensive gap there is monstrous. BYU averages more than double the number of points per game that Houston does. The yardage is majorly different. You could even argue Houston actually has a better defense than BYU. We go game over game, it's only 5 extra points added. I think they probably could have added 10 points to this total, and that would have been a lot more justifiable. Love the over here in this game.
Yeah, both teams are going to throw the kitchen sink at each other. BYU looking to stay undefeated. Utah has nothing to play for. This is their Super Bowl. Let's not forget Utah was picked at the start of the season to win the Big 12. Very disappointing in a rivalry game where a team hasn't won since 2006. Give me the points with Utah. Wouldn't be shocked if they do, in fact, strike the upset.
You know what's fascinating about a Utes team that is 4-4, as you see here, who has lost 4 straight? This is their first game as a true underdog this season, despite being one of the worst offenses in the Big 12. To your point, I think we actually see more offense than expected. L.J. Martin is back. He is healthy. 2 consecutive games breaking through the century mark for BYU's offense. Over 64.5, light number tonight, out in Rice-Eccles in the Holy War. A significant Saturday in the SEC in Week 11. Up next.
Together, both Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson had huge nights. Aaron Rodgers loves the 2 big targets, and he says if this is going to happen, going to be very tough on the defense to decide who they want to go after.
Adams and this kid, Wilson, I won't deny what they can do, but nobody else does jack.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Right here with you on Pro Football Today on SportsGrid. Odds in motion, trying to see what lines have moved throughout the week.
Never felt more comfortable in this set than I do for this year. I'm just getting angry. The hot takes are going to be here all long, people. What in the world is going on in Miami, Dom?
It's not particularly anything to shy away from just because many people are on top of it.
Hot take. I think this line is asking you once again to take New Orleans.
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
A lot of concern, I would say, for Georgia in Carson Beck. 3 interceptions once again. His third 3-interception game in the last 5 for UGA.
You can argue if they had Alex Orji as their starting quarterback for Georgia, they would be perfect and unbeaten right now just by not turning the football over and running it with your talented backfield.
The early line, only on SportsGrid.
A significant Saturday in the SEC. 2 top 20 tilts that will not only dictate the conference picture, but maybe that of the college football playoff as well. We're about 5 minutes away from kick to start the Week 11 Saturday slate. Let's go to a 3:30 p.m. Eastern time kick in the Grove in Oxford. It's Ole Miss and it's Georgia. As we look at the numbers, the Bulldogs just a slight favorite in this game. 1.5 points as we get ready for it, or at least I thought we were. But Kev, as we break down the matchup, Georgia, since the middle portion of 2020, has played 56 football games. They have won 53. All 3 losses for the Bulldogs coming against the same program, that of the Alabama Crimson Tide. Ole Miss is Ole Miss, but they're not Alabama in this short number. How do you see the game today in Oxford playing out?
Yeah, this is just one of these spots where if not for me watching Lisi tank the Eagles season, I would have came in with the best bet of an alt spread on Georgia, but I don't want to tank the Bulldog season. And again, I watched what you did to my bird. Stay away.
What?
That's all I ask.
What did I do?
No, with the the Niners game, remember the best bet.
That was last year.
Yeah, and I'll never forget it. Just so you know, and I wanted to remind you about it one more time. This is just, it is one of those things. People have like, Georgia's been better this. What are you, or Ole Miss has been better. What are we talking about? No, they have not. They've played a ranked team as a favorite and lost. And don't tell me they should have won. Why should they have won? Because it was a close game. So when a team loses a close game and you're on them, you convince themselves they should have won. No, they shouldn't have. They should have got a stop. They didn't get a stop. Nuss stepped up. Dark got the football. Mr. Heisman couldn't get a touchdown when the moment mattered. Because every time he's playing his best opponents, he plays his worst games. Consistently. Everybody is banking on Beck completely just playing the worst football of his career. Bounce back spots. How many times do we have to talk about these things? The best game of Beck's career against Ole Miss. Slump buster. Familiar foe. Georgia. Bulldogs. How many times do we have to do this?
Yeah, well, it's possible. I am sort of intrigued by this spread. I will say when I looked at Jackson Dart's number, it's 90 yards higher than what Georgia's given up in terms of the passing defense, right? They're giving up $187 through the air. They contain Quinn Ewers in that passing attack for much of that first half and into the third quarter. He's got to get through this number today for them to have any shot. So I did alt them to 350 plus at plus 470, But this is the best bet for me. He doesn't get there, they have no shot to cover this line or even win the game outright.
Georgia's defense has been so much better in the last month. It started with the Texas game. They are now one of 13 FBS programs allowing less than 300 yards per game. Ole Miss is not because they give up a lot through the air, but the second best rushing defense in the country. We know the Rebs play fast. 645 snaps is what the defense has seen, and they are only allowing 4.4 yards per play. I say that because where Ole Miss's strength is, I think, is keeping this game under defensively. But to your point, we're barking all day long, not as the underdog, but with the Bulldogs. Until they lose to a team in the last 3.5 years not named Alabama, I'm not going to be the one to bet that it happens. Georgia minus the 1.5 or on the money line. Night game in Tiger Stadium, one of the best environments in college football. So much so a live Tiger is going to be on the sideline today down in Baton Rouge. It's a top 15 tilt. It works as a de facto elimination game for the college football playoff. It's LSU and Alabama. The Crimson Tide, Joe, a 2.5-point road favorite entering Death Valley tonight when the sun has set. A very difficult place to win. How do you see it?
I see the Tiger King, myself and LSU winning tonight outright, plus the 2.5. I just think with the week off of preparation, Blake Baker and that defense will contain Jalen Milroe, and Garrett Nussmeier bounces back with a better effort. I think he does strike the upset later tonight.
Look, I'll make this simple. There are two futures I have that need LSU to win this game. Them to win the SEC and Bama to miss the playoff. That is why this is a money line bet, not a spread bet, because I cannot get middled here, but I really like Bama in this spot. The Boar is money off of a bye. LSU this season in that game against Ole Miss did not overwhelm me. They played USC outright, loss, A&M, collapse. They cannot play complete football games. And Alabama, despite having the 2 losses, has also had some great performances. They have to do it on the road. It's a tough test, no doubt. But I trust Milroe more than anybody else that's going to be on this field tonight.
I'll just add this. If you like LSU in this game, you take the 220 in terms of the value to make the CFP. It won't be there after tonight.
It's a really good point as well. I think we see some points tonight over 58.5. Alabama's defense better against Missouri. LSU's offense much more potent, and I think Jalen Milroe does expose some of the issues to this Bayou Bengals defense. We get points in a great game under the lights in Baton Rouge. He's Kevin Walsh. He's Joe Lisi. I'm Ben Stevens. Week number 11 starts right now.
And to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the game starts. Place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
It's a new era in CFP to start off this year, put on full display.
My take on this game is simple. I know some people will be upset about it. Good riddance to the Pac-12.
Can you do it in terms of the week to week to week?
I don't see a pathway for this team to miss the college football playoffs.
We want to make sure you have those best bets in the entirety of our betting cards.
That was thinking! But he had that program was only going there!
Only on SportsGrid.
The sharpest football contest show in the land. The Las Vegas Football Contest Show focuses on Circus Sports Million, Circus Survivor, and the Westgate Super Contest, handicapping the games and releasing our contest picks every week of the season. With 2 former Super Contest winners, Brady Cannon and James Salinas, a former NFL player, Mike Pritchard, and over $1 million in contest prize money won combined, the Las Vegas Football Contest Show will have you prepared this season like